Hello and welcome back to the Springs in the Desert podcast. My name is Cassandra. I'll be your host for today's episode. And we are here with one of our co founders, Anne. How's it going?
Going great, Cassandra. Good to be with you.
Thanks so much. And we are here today with a special guest, Eileen Tully of Sourcem Corda. She has a pregnancy and child loss ministry. And so we are going to be diving into her story and her ministry and talking about the complicated intersections of infertility and pregnancy
Mm,
loss and that grief that unfortunately many of us know very well. So Eileen, welcome to the podcast.
thanks so much. It's so good to be with you, ladies.
Yes, thanks so much for sharing yourself and your ministry with us today. So, we just wanted to kick this off by inviting you to just share whatever you'd like of your story with your audience and how Sursum Corda came into being.
Yeah. So our story of loss begins with two early miscarriages that my husband and I had. About 9 weeks for both of them, so between 8 and 9 weeks. So they at the time were very devastating, and I didn't know how to process them. I found that there at the time too, it was maybe 2009 was my first miscarriage. So the internet has changed so much even since then, in those last 15 years or so. So there are so many resources available now that weren't then. And it just left me really floundering and grasping for anything that could comfort me or soothe me or help me through the process. And then in 2011, we experienced the loss of identical twin daughters. One, they had something called TTTS. It was a diagnosis where they had like irregular vascular connections across my placenta. So instead of just exchanging blood with me, which would have been the normal way, they were exchanging blood with each other. And it was hurting both of them. And when we received the diagnosis about halfway through the pregnancy, our doctor urged us, and told us that there was an intervention that we could do, an in utero surgery to correct these vascular connections, cauterize them so that it was just the way it was supposed to be. But the day after the surgery, one of our daughters died. And I went on bed rest for 8 weeks and then delivered the other daughter at about 28 weeks. And she lived in the NICU for her whole life. It was 47 days long. And then she contracted an infection and she died also. And so it's hard to verbalize exactly how devastating that was. Just the whole experience was so traumatizing, from the diagnosis to the surgery to one dying to delivering them both emergently, then burying the first one who had died in utero, and then the second one living. The NICU experience by itself is just a series of ups and downs. That's a roller coaster ride. And then to have that culminate with her dying also, um, like, to say that I was just completely leveled, like, emotionally, is an understatement. And I just didn't feel like I could function. It was hard to get out of bed. It was burying two daughters in 2 months. And and so the pain that came with that also, like my miscarriage had done, left me searching for resources that we just did not find. Our church was like lovely in meeting our physical needs, like bringing us meals and helping, even just when I was on bed rest, helping us through all the things that we needed done that I couldn't do. We had three little boys at the time for our family. But really what ended up happening was that my faith was shaken in a way that I could never have anticipated. And our priest, God bless him, I know he was just trying to comfort us, but he told us that we had two guardian angels in heaven now, and um, and that was it. And I'm a convert, and even I knew that wasn't true either, right? So I know that he wasn't trying to be like theologically deceptive or anything like that, but he really was trying to comfort us. But it didn't comfort us at all, and it really left me questioning God's goodness, truthfully, just wondering, like, I've always been a Christian as long as I can remember. I remember praying with my mom to become a Christian when I was like 5 years old. And I never had like a rebellious time. I just felt like, God, I've always followed you. And I've known that you say you're a good father. I take you at your word. I believe that you are. But like, how is this good? That was just that lingering question that was in my head, was just trying to reconcile this intense pain with my faith and with what I knew about God. And so I did ask him that. And I can tell you a little bit later about how I felt that he answered me with that in a way that gave me a bit of a lifeline to hold on to my faith where I felt like I was underwater. But yeah, it was out of that lack of resources that I think I just felt called to create the resources for other people. And it took years to get to the place where I felt like I could offer something. I'm going to say it was probably 7 or 8 years later that I felt like I had healed enough that I could make sense of the tools that had helped me, that I could put them together and share them with other people, like collect them and share them to help other people during that intense, I can hardly function kind of grief that comes from those kinds of losses. So that's where my ministry came from.
Sure. Thank you so
Eileen, I
much.
just want to
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I know that there are so many in our community who will be able to relate at least to some parts of your story, if that's not their full experience. That's not my experience. I have never been pregnant, and yet so much of your story connected with how our ministry came to be as well, because we were finding that the resources we need, and I would say Kimberly and I didn't even know what resources we needed. Like, you're just sort of out there floating. I
Yes.
mean, there's no playbook. There's nothing to show you how to manage this experience. And so we ran up against many of the same obstacles, and also just lovely, good-hearted priests who would say things that were
Mm.
deeply unhelpful and even sometimes hurtful, though they didn't mean for that. So, yeah, I just resonated so much with what you said about finding that dearth of resources. And then what a beautiful grace that God, over time and in your process of healing, called you out of that and said, well, Eileen, I think it might be time for you to, yeah, to start kind of creating those resources that are so needed.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I felt a call in my spirit, like he was prompting me to do it. And my response was sort of just like, okay, but how? Like, I don't even have an idea of where to start. And I'm sure you felt the same way with your ministry. Like, how do you even begin to go about something like that, or tell people that that is something that you have for them available? And so, of course, that came over time too. And he sent people my way to help me with the process. But yeah, it was like I had to assent first, and then I didn't understand how. And then actually the Blessed Mother was a major, what's the word? Just a major turning point in my awareness of how I was going to present these things, Our Lady of Sorrow specifically. And then it was like, okay, now I know, like, sort of the trajectory or the framework that I'm going to build this on. But I still needed, like, but how do you build a website, and how do you start doing this? So those practical elements too, I needed to learn. But it was, yeah, I think he wanted to have my assent and then be like, okay, like, put a bookmark in that. And then I'm going to show you I'll help you with the rest. Yeah.
Yeah. And so much of what we're doing here at Springs in the Desert is trying to transcend divisions that we might draw among ourselves, that people, when we bring people together for retreats, we've got people suffering with primary infertility and secondary infertility. And for some of them, pregnancy or child loss is a part of that. So
Yes.
we're all about just kind of bridging that and finding the similarities in between those experiences so that we can talk about it in like a productive way and just work on exploring and then healing that grief together, because so many of us go through medical trauma. So many of us go
Mm,
through having these difficult relationships with the fact that we have a body,
yes.
and children also have a body, and the relationship with God and how these struggles impact our faith, whether or not
Mhm.
um we've always kind of been living a Christian life, or we do have a conversion story. Like, even I, as a cradle Catholic, feel like I also had like a conversion
Yes.
moment, and story, but then but we get into this stuff. It's like, well, now I'm trying. Like, now but it's like, why is this happening now? But, and then kind of working through that to be with Mary at the foot of the cross, that God's beloved mother wasn't spared, even like to degrees that
Right.
we can't even imagine, the
Right.
depths of her sorrow. So just, you know, with some of those kind of similarities between and like connections between the crosses of infertility and miscarriage in mind, do you have any words or experiences of comfort that you would like to share with our listeners, either from your experience personally or your experience in your ministry?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you were saying about, the shared experiences of suffering, even if they're so different. Mine and Anne's are different, but some of the things that you don't recognize are going to be affected. It's because it's more than just the experience itself. It affects our relationships with other people. It affected my marriage, right? I was struggling. And I'm sure with infertility, it's the same way. You just have it's just a strain on the relationship. It affected my relationship with God. Just how I viewed him, like maybe I was, well, we have, in addition to our suffering of the experience of infertility or loss, we are suffer in our thoughts about the experience, right? And so we have the loss, but then we have thoughts about, like you said, like I have a body, or like my body has failed me, or my body's broken, or God is withholding something good from me. We have all these thoughts that we sometimes just accept, but we forget that we also have an enemy who operates by lying to us. And
Yep.
he's been doing it since the garden, right? Like at the garden, he's saying to Adam and Eve, like, God knows that you're just going to be like him. Like, did he really want to withhold that good thing from you? Like he's just planting lies about them and about God. And it drove the two of them apart, and it drove a wedge between them and God. And he's still doing that to us today, in
Yeah.
all of our circumstances. And so, if there's a circumstance where he can drive a little like doubt or a wedge or something in there, that's his MO, right? That's how he works. And so, not only do we have our own thoughts about it, but we're also being told thoughts how to think about it from someone who hates us, right? So, we have to, I think getting clear on the fact that it cannot cause us to suffer twice, really. You suffer the experience, and then you just I'm a melancholic temperament. I spent a lot of time in my head, and I would just spin out of control, like dwelling on these what ifs, or what if I could have done this, or what should I have done differently, or just all of these thoughts. And so, one of the most helpful things for me has been learning some mindset coaching, Catholic mindset coaching, for how to just bring reason into these thoughts, like bring my reason online and become aware of how I'm suffering from these thoughts. But as a word of comfort that you were asking for, I would love to share even just how I felt like God told me this was good, like
Yes,
how he was
please.
still good. Yes. So it's kind of funny, and it involves chocolate, which seems kind of like ridiculous, but it did. So here we go. My second twin died on a Thursday around midnight. And when we went to mass that Sunday, you can imagine that my head was not in mass on Sunday, right? Like I was just processing. I mean, we watched her code, we watched them, try to revive her.
Oh,
It was just completely traumatizing. And I had just acute trauma, acute stress.
of course. Yeah.
That was just, it impaired me really. Like I felt like just disconnected from myself as a result of it. And I can remember, just being in mass and still trying to process and make sense of all that had happened. I might cry a little bit, sorry. And as we knelt down for the consecration, I just remember like what was going on in my head was that thought of like, I have always loved you. And that like now I've since come to read the Psalms and see this same sentiment there. Like I've
Mm,
served you from my youth. Like how long are you going to hide your face from me? This kind of thing, like I have always
mhm.
loved you. I have always known you to be good. You say you're good. I believe you. But like how is this good? And my thought was that I had little children of my own. I can understand that sometimes we need to tell them no for something that's not good for them. But like how is this not good? Like how could you say no to this? Right? Because first you took one, then you took the other. Like you put them there to begin with, and then you took them away. And I really was sort of racking my brain for like an example of how I what under what circumstances would I do something like this to my children is what I felt like he was doing something to me. Um and it kind of it came to me before I even like could put the words to it to verbalize it, but it was like he gave me a scene. And it really felt like he was like opening the veil a little bit to give me this flash of an understanding and relating it to my own experience. And what I was doing was making a cake for my son, or you could even, you could imagine just making a cake for your 2-year-old nephew or somebody like a 2-year-old in your life, right? My young son, who at the time was 2. So there's the reason that it's this 2-year-old is that I had counted out these chocolate chips that I was going to use to spell his name on this birthday cake. We are going to have a birthday party for him that night, right? It was like the whole scene came to me. And he asked if he could just have like a couple of those chips. And I said no because I needed them. I was going to use them for something that he was going to love more than just the chips, right? But when you tell a 2-year-old no, it does not go well. So
Right.
he had a temper tantrum, of course, just feeling like he was being denied something good that he wanted. But it's right there, like, what, just a couple, it wouldn't hurt, like just the whole thing. It's just like, what? But I, as his mother, was able to just hug him and comfort him in his temper tantrum and just say, please trust me that I'm gonna have a plan for those. And it's actually like for you, and you're gonna love it. But I have a plan. And so it was saying no for something that would be good for him. It would be a little treat, it would be something great. But it was because of his two-ness that he couldn't understand, right? But like 2-year-olds are so like instant, right? They need it now, they want it now. Like any denial is like, they're so emotional and like instant gratification. And of course, you can probably see where this is going, was that God was just revealing to me that, like, I'm the parent in this situation, right? And you're the 2-year-old. And no, you're not having a temper tantrum. Like, my grief was not a temper tantrum.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
what it was just me being only able to see the present, right? And him being able to see the big picture, like what the plan was. That the birthday party, a 2-year-old telling him the birthday party is in like 6 hours is like, it might as well be like 5 years from now.
Yeah.
But that it's coming, like something better is coming. I'm going to use this. It's going to be part of my plan. I have something better, and it's actually for you. Like we're going to do something good for you. And so just having this awareness, I remember it did not like bring me healing. It was not like all of a sudden that was 2 days after she died, and all of a sudden I was healed of my grief. Like it wasn't like that at all. I still grieved intensely, but it felt like a little lifeline to hold on to when those big waves of grief came rolling in. That it was just like, okay, wait, I can see how you could say no and be good, and you see the big picture. I only see this. I can't see how you're going to use it yet, but I trust you. It was just that, it was just him asking me to trust me and using my own experience to show me how. And like, oh my goodness, did that comfort me, right? It definitely showed me that he could still be a good and loving father, that he could comfort me through the grief and the pain, but still ask me to trust him that he was going to use it. And it's only, I mean, now we're 13 years out from that loss, and I can see that it, it was for my good. Like it definitely, I like this me better than I liked the me before that. I
Mm,
could see how I have grown so much. I've grown in my faith, in my relationship with him, in my relationships with others. Like it's
yeah.
a different, um, I'm a different person
Yeah.
now. And I think, when we go through suffering and we try to do it with virtue of the virtues of faith, hope, and love, mostly, like Our Lady did. Just like, I believe you. I hope that you're
Mhm.
using this for my good. I love you. Those are all the theological virtues because God is their object, right? Faith in God,
Yeah.
hope in God, love of God.
Yeah.
Um, when we can learn through her, I think she's just the perfect example of doing it. But Jesus also, when he prayed in Gethsemane, he asked God to take the cup from him, right? Like, please don't make me have to drink of this cup. But the prayer ended with not my will, but your will. And so it was God's will that he would endure the cross. But Hebrews tells us it was for the joy set before him. Like he knew he had to go through that cross, that passion to get to the joy on the other side of it, right? The cross wasn't the joy. And so that's how God operates. He brings us through and he doesn't create our suffering, but he uses it, and he uses it for our good. And that was my experience too.
Eileen, I'm so grateful for everything that you just shared. What a beautiful testimony. There are a couple things that really stood out to me, one of which was your grief is not a temper tantrum. And I think
Yes.
that is something we might want to put on a poster and
Yeah.
just hang that
Tattoo
up
it on your forehead.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah,
My grief is not a temper tantrum. Yes.
exactly. Put that on your refrigerator, put that on your bathroom mirror, because I think that that's a really great point. But I also wanted to thank you for sharing so vulnerably. And, as I see you wipe those tears away, um, I think that's a beautiful example to our people, whether or not they have experienced the loss of a child or, the loss of expectations and dreams every month with a negative pregnancy test, or as they're entering in menopause and seeing that window close. Um, because it kind of shows that there's not this sort of timeline, playbook, endpoint. This is what grief and processing and healing has to look like. Um, the fact that it still brings up those emotions for you
Mm.
is important, and it's a good thing. I mean, my goodness, these are your children that you're talking about that you've lost, and so often people around us, I think because of their own discomfort with suffering, want to put a kind of time frame on that, right? And they might say explicitly or implicitly, get over it. It's
Yeah.
time,
It's time to be done. It's
move
time to move
on.
on. Yeah.
And so I just appreciate you showing that emotion mixed in with the real hope and the promise that you see, for your life, and being able to see God's faithfulness in it all. But it is a mixed bag. It's not as if we're going to get to a
Yes.
point where I'm healed and it doesn't bother me anymore. I think that's a really important message, for our people.
Yeah. Oh, for anyone going through any kind of suffering, I really do think that yeah, I mean, suffering is hard. It's purgative, right? Like it's
Mm.
definitely it's work. It's an evil in as much like a theological evil in that it's not how what God created us for. right? And
Yeah.
so we recognize that when we are suffering, it we resist it because it it's not what we were made for. We were made, think about what the garden was like, that relationship, that intimate relationship with him, and what heaven will be like. No more suffering, no more tears, right? That's what we're made for. But in the meantime, we're groaning. Like that's what Romans talks about. All of creation is just groaning, like sort of longing for that again, right? What we had.
Yeah. Yeah. And so important too that um when we're in these difficult moments doing what our contributor Claire, who is the therapist, refers to as the work of the moment. I mean, there's only so much that, tools that we all in ministry know how important the tools are, and the tools
Mhm.
are there to prepare you and support you as you do the work of the moment, in
Yes.
her terms, but so important that when you find yourself there. I'm reading this book, I Believe in Love, which is a, a personal retreat based on the teachings of Saint Therese. Just to embrace our identity as daughters and sons of God, which sounds kind of like a greeting card trite, but when we're dealing with these really heavy adult things, to remind ourselves that and to allow ourselves to be children of the Father
Mm.
and everything that means. And I also heard in a homily recently, I believe the priest was preaching about um the psalm that Jesus quotes on the cross, like, my God, why have you abandoned me?" I'm pretty sure that's what he was talking about. That psalm being kind of like a thanksgiving for deliverance yet to come. That
Yes.
in those dark times, like Jesus on the cross, about to give up his own life, that we still find ourselves in the arms of our Father, in the arms of the Good Shepherd, being
Yes.
carried through, whether or not we feel like we are, because that's not what the Christian life is about. Gotta remind myself that. Um, but that is our reality as God's sons and daughters. So I just wanted to invite you before we wrap up this conversation to just tell us a little bit about your ministry and what you offer and where people can find you.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that Our Lady of Sorrows was really sort of pivotal in my creation of the materials that I offer to people. And that's because I was putting together a homeschool lesson for my children. I'm a convert, as I've said, and so I still learn about her under all these different titles. And it was September 15th. It was her feast day, and I was just like, oh, let's talk about the 7 Sorrows of Mary today for the kids. Printed out something, and as I was reading it, I thought, whoa, these are significant, and I need to look into these more. So I went on one of my nights out for good behavior, that my husband calls it, just like get out of the house night. Um, I took with me a book called The Glories of Mary by Saint Alphonsus Liguori, and he talks in depth about the each of the sorrows. But what I saw in each of the sorrows was a parallel with my own experience of loss. And so I'll give just an example, like, we pray about, or we meditate on the presentation in the joyful mysteries, right? But the prophecy of Simeon is the first sword of sorrow. And so Our Lady went into that presentation into the temple joyful, right? Just celebrating being able to present her son. And I imagine that this prophecy, what she said to Saint Matilda, I think, that all her joy turned to sorrow. And I just thought, if it was like the rug was pulled out from under her, sort of, how we all have that experience of like thinking one thing, or even if you've had a pregnancy loss, you're like, you're pregnant and then it's taken away, right? And our twins were there and they were taken away. And so for me, I just was able to think about that ultrasound, that one where we learned that they were like, it was like, yay, it's the middle. We're finding out whether they're girls or boys. We couldn't wait. And it was like, actually, they're dying. Like, like just everything changed. All our joy turned to sorrow. And so as I was just reading each one of these, I thought, oh my goodness, like even, I mean, of course, to a lesser degree than her suffering, but just that I could relate a little bit if I put myself in her place and thought, what must that have felt like for her? I was able to go, oh, I felt that when I went through this or when we did this, you know. And the one that really clicked for me was just receiving the body of Jesus. It's gonna make me cry again, you guys. Come on now.
It's
All right.
okay.
But I just imagine, our vision, our images of the cross are so sanitized. He has
Yes.
a loincloth on, there's hardly any blood, but the reality was that he was beaten beyond recognition. His face was probably swollen and his beard being plucked out. You can imagine just all the bruising and sores, and um, it would be the kind of body that only a mother could love, right? And so for me, after having watched them do this coating on our daughter, the code and the paddles, and I mean everything that you see on a coating, but she's 3 pounds, right? Just the needles and the chest compressions and all of it. It just left her bruised and bloodied. I'll just say that. And um and yet, the opportunity to hold her after that and just see how beautiful she was, like it just I was in the Starbucks thinking about this and crying like this in the Starbucks, right? It was just like, "Oh my gosh, yes, you understand this. You know what that was like." And, one of my guilty pleasures is The Office. I don't know if you ladies watch The Office. I think I quote an Office line every single day. I'll quote my one for today was that when Pam Beasley was at the Chili's for the Dundie Awards, she was like, "Woo, I feel God in this Chili's tonight," right? I don't know if you, but I was like, I am meeting Our Lady in the Starbucks tonight. It was like my Dundee's moment,
Yes.
where she was just like meeting me in this very personal way. I wasn't drunk either, I promise. It was just tea. But I just felt like she was just connecting with me. She desired to connect with me over the shared experience of suffering, of child loss, which was so humbling. But
Yeah.
I realized that I wanted to, or maybe the Holy Spirit wanted me to, or that this was just the direction that I needed to go in to share with other people, because she's also the one who gives us the grace to endure those things with the virtues that she did, right? Those theological virtues we said earlier. And so she is at the crux, kind of. I feel like a one-trick pony because she's just like everything I do is centered around her. But what I do is I offer retreats and some courses to help process those thoughts that we talked about earlier, some coaching, grief mentorship coaching, or just even mindset coaching to work through those. I have a couple of prayer books that are both around her. One's Praying the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows, but with meditations on each sorrow for grieving mothers specifically. Um, and then I have a podcast. I think I said that. And the other book is a journal through Lent on each of the seven sorrows, and specifically for mothers of pregnancy and child loss. So yeah, like she's at the heart of everything that I do.
That's wonderful. And I think that's a great message to close on, that there is nowhere that God will not come and find you.
Mm.
He is everywhere
In the
with
in
you.
the Starbucks. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's right.
There
Yes,
is
he
nowhere
is.
he won't go for
Yes,
you.
that's right. That's
Thank you
right.
so much, Eileen. This is really, wow. We're gonna have to have you back. Well, that's what we say all the time. We're just gonna have you back. There's so much to talk about. But
There's so much.
for our listeners, you can find Eileen at eileentully.com, and we're gonna leave everything in the show notes for you. And thanks so much for joining us. And just remember that God loves you, and so do we. Thank you.